The night was quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you feel like the world is holding its breath. Stars dotted the sky, their light faint but steady, as if they were watching something unfold below. Somewhere in the middle of nowhere, a military base stood hidden, its walls thick with secrets. Inside, a team of scientists worked tirelessly, their faces lit by the cold glow of monitors. They were close, so close, to something that could change everything. But they weren't the only ones watching. Far above, in the vast expanse of space, a ship hovered silently, its presence undetected. On board, a lone figure stared at the earth below, her eyes filled with curiosity and a hint of longing. She wasn't supposed to be here. This wasn't her mission. But something about this planet called to her, something she couldn't ignore. Her name didn't matter. What mattered was what she was about to do. She had been observing humans for weeks, studying their habits, their emotions, their strange little lives. They were fascinating, so different from her own kind. They laughed, they cried, they loved, things she had only read about in reports. But tonight she wasn't here to observe. Tonight she was here to act. The ship's systems had detected something unusual on the base below, something powerful. A formula, a chemical concoction unlike anything she had ever seen. It was labeled as classified, its purpose unclear, but the readings were off the charts. Whatever it was important. And she needed to know more. The descent was quick, her movements precise. She slipped past the base's defenses like a shadow, her advanced technology rendering her invisible to human eyes. The lab was easy to find, its doors no match for her tools. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of chemicals and the hum of machines. She moved silently, her heart, or whatever passed for a heart in her species, pounding in her chest. There it was, sitting on a table in a small, unmarked vial. The formula. She picked it up, turning it over in her hands. It glowed faintly, a soft blue light that seemed to pulse with energy. She didn't know what it was, but she could feel its power. And then, without thinking, she did something she would soon regret. It was an accident, really. A moment of carelessness. The vial slipped from her fingers, and before she could catch it, the liquid inside spilled onto her skin. It was cold at first, then warm, then hot. She gasped as the sensation spread, her body reacting in ways she couldn't understand. Her vision blurred, her senses heightened. She could hear the hum of the machines louder than ever, feel the texture of the air against her skin. And then it hit her, a wave of emotion so intense it nearly knocked her off her feet. It was like nothing she had ever felt before. Joy, fear, desire, all mixed together in a whirlwind that left her breathless. She stumbled, her hands gripping the edge of the table for support. What was happening to her? Back on the ship, alarms blared. The formula was designed for humans, not for her kind. Her body wasn't equipped to handle it. But it was too late. The effects were already taking hold, spreading through her system like wildfire. She needed to get out of there, needed to find a way to reverse what she had done. But as she turned to leave, she heard footsteps. Human footsteps. Someone was coming. She froze, her mind racing. If they found her, if they saw what she was, it would be over. Not just for her, but for everything. She had to think fast. But the formula was making it hard to think at all. Her body felt alive in ways she couldn't explain, her thoughts clouded by a strange, overwhelming need. She didn't know what to do. And then the door opened. The man who walked in was tall, his uniform crisp, his eyes sharp. He was human, but there was something different about him. Something dangerous. He scanned the room, his gaze landing on the empty vial. His expression darkened. "Who's there?" he demanded, his voice low and steady. She held her breath, her body pressed against the wall. She could feel his presence, his energy, and it only made the effects of the formula stronger. Her heart raced, her mind a mess of fear and something else, something she couldn't name. She had to move, had to act, but her body wouldn't obey. And then he turned, his eyes locking onto hers. For a moment, time seemed to stop. He saw her. Really saw her. And in that moment, everything changed. What happened next would be a mystery, a moment lost in the chaos of what was to come. But one thing was certain. The formula had done something to her. Something irreversible. And now she was no longer just an observer. She was part of their world, whether she wanted to be or not. The man took a step forward, his hand reaching for the weapon at his side. She had to make a choice, and fast. But with the formula coursing through her veins, clouding her thoughts, she wasn't sure she could trust herself. The tension in the room was palpable, the air thick with unspoken questions. Who was she? What was she doing here? And what would happen now that their worlds had collided? The answers would have to wait. Because right now all that mattered was survival. And as the man took another step closer, she knew one thing for certain. Nothing would ever be the same again. The man's eyes narrowed as he took another step forward, his hand hovering over the weapon at his side. She could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw tightened as he studied her. He was calculating, assessing the threat she might pose. But she wasn't a threat, not intentionally. She was just lost. Lost in a world that wasn't hers, lost in a body that no longer felt like her own. The formula was still coursing through her, its effects unpredictable. Her skin tingled, her thoughts racing in 1,000 different directions. She wanted to explain, to tell him she meant no harm, but the words wouldn't come. How could she explain something she didn't even understand herself? "Who are you?" he asked, his voice steady but laced with suspicion. "And what are you doing here?" She opened her mouth to speak, but all that came out was a shaky breath. Her voice felt foreign, like it belonged to someone else. The man's gaze flicked to the empty vial on the table, then back to her. His expression hardened. "That's classified," he said, his tone sharper now. "You have no business being here." She wanted to tell him it was an accident, that she hadn't meant to take it, but the words stuck in her throat. Instead, she took a step back, her movements unsteady. The room seemed to tilt around her, the walls closing in. She needed to get out, needed to find a way to undo what she had done. But the man was blocking the door, his presence like a wall she couldn't climb. She could feel the weight of his stare, the intensity of his focus. He wasn't going to let her go. Not without answers. I didn't mean to," she finally managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. It was the truth, but it sounded weak even to her own ear. The man didn't respond, his expression unreadable. He took another step forward and she instinctively backed away, her heart pounding in her chest. The distance between them was shrinking, and with it, her options. She could try to fight, but she wasn't sure she had the strength. The formula had left her feeling both powerful and vulnerable, a dangerous combination. She could feel it working through her, amplifying her senses but also clouding her judgment. Every sound, every movement felt magnified. She could hear the faint hum of the lights above, the soft rustle of his uniform as he shifted his weight. It was overwhelming, and she wasn't sure how much longer she could hold it together. "You're coming with me," he said finally, his tone leaving no room for argument. He reached for her, his hand closing around her arm. His grip was firm but not painful, and for a moment she considered letting him take her. Maybe it would be easier that way. Maybe he could help her. But then she remembered who she was, what she was. If he found out the truth, there was no telling what he would do. She couldn't take that risk. With a sudden burst of energy, she pulled away, her movements faster than she thought possible. The man stumbled, caught off guard by her speed. She didn't wait for him to recover. She bolted for the door, her legs carrying her faster than she had ever moved before. The hallway outside was dimly lit, the walls lined with doors and equipment she didn't recognize. She didn't know where she was going, but she knew she had to keep moving. Behind her, she could hear the man shouting, his voice echoing through the corridor. He was calling for backup, and she knew it was only a matter of time before others arrived. She had to find a way out, and fast. The base was a maze, its layout confusing and unfamiliar. She turned corners at random, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. The formula was still affecting her, her body reacting in ways she couldn't control. Her vision blurred, then sharpened, then blurred again. She could feel her heart racing, her pulse pounding in her ears. It was like her body was at war with itself, torn between the effects of the formula and her own instincts. She needed to focus, needed to think, but it was so hard. Everything felt too loud, too bright, too much. Finally, she found herself in a large, open room filled with vehicles and equipment. A garage, she realized. This was her chance. She scanned the area, her eyes landing on a small, unmarked vehicle near the back. It looked like some kind of transport, its design simple but functional. She didn't know how to drive it, but she didn't have a choice. She had to try. She climbed inside, her hands trembling as she searched for the controls. The vehicle hummed to life, its engine quiet but powerful. She could hear voices behind her, the sound of footsteps growing closer. They were coming. She didn't have much time. With a deep breath, she gripped the steering mechanism and pressed down on the accelerator. The vehicle lurched forward, its tires screeching against the floor. She didn't look back. She couldn't. The garage doors were closed, but she didn't slow down. At the last second, she hit a button on the dashboard and the doors began to open. She squeezed through the gap, the vehicle scraping against the sides as she sped out into the night. The cool air hit her face, a sharp contrast to the heat of the base. She could see the stars above, their light faint but steady. For a moment she felt a flicker of hope. She was free. But then she heard the sound of engines behind her and her heart sank. They were following her. She pushed the vehicle as fast as it would go, her hands gripping the controls tightly. The landscape around her was a blur, the trees and hills passing by in a rush of shadows. She didn't know where she was going, but she knew she couldn't stop. Not yet. The formula was still coursing through her, its effects growing stronger with every passing second. She could feel it in her veins, a strange electric energy that made her skin tingle and her thoughts race. It was like nothing she had ever experienced before, and it terrified her. Behind her, the lights of the pursuing vehicles grew brighter, their engines roaring as they closed the distance. She could see them in the rearview mirror, their shapes dark and menacing against the night sky. They weren't going to let her go. Not without a fight. She clenched her jaw, her determination hardening. She couldn't let them catch her. She couldn't let them find out what she was. But as the chase continued, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was running out of time. The formula was changing her, and she didn't know how much longer she could hold on. The road ahead was dark, the path uncertain. She didn't know where it would lead, but she knew she had to keep going. For now that was enough. The night stretched out before her, endless and full of possibilities. But as the sound of the engines grew louder, she couldn't help but wonder if she was running towards something, or away from everything. The answers were out there, somewhere. But for now all she could do was keep moving. And hope that, somehow, she would find a way to survive. The vehicle roared through the night, its tires kicking up dirt and gravel as she pushed it to its limits. The wind whipped through her hair, cold and biting, but she barely felt it. Her focus was razor-sharp, her hands gripping the steering mechanism so tightly her knuckles turned white. Behind her, the headlights of the pursuing vehicles cut through the darkness like beams of judgment, relentless and unyielding. They were gaining on her, their engines growling like predators closing in on their prey. She could hear the faint crackle of their radios, the voices barking orders, the tension in their tones. They weren't just chasing her, they were hunting her. Her mind raced as she tried to think of a way out. The formula was still coursing through her veins, its effects growing more intense with every passing second. Her senses were heightened to an almost unbearable degree. She could hear the hum of the vehicle's engine, the crunch of tires on gravel, the distant howl of the wind. She could feel every bump in the road, every vibration of the steering mechanism beneath her hands. It was overwhelming, but it also gave her an edge. She could react faster, think quicker, move with a precision that felt almost superhuman. But it came at a cost. Her body felt like it was on fire, her thoughts a chaotic storm of fear, adrenaline, and something else, something she couldn't quite name. It was as if the formula was rewriting her, reshaping her into something new. And she wasn't sure she liked it. The road ahead split into two, and she made a split-second decision, veering sharply to the left. The tires skidded, the vehicle fishtailing before she regained control. The maneuver bought her a few precious seconds, but it wasn't enough. The pursuing vehicles adjusted quickly, their headlights slicing through the darkness as they followed her. She could see the silhouettes of the drivers now, their faces grim and determined. They weren't going to give up. Not until they had her. She pressed down harder on the accelerator, the engine whining in protest. The landscape around her was a blur of shadows and shapes, the trees and hills merging into a dark, indistinct mass. She didn't know where she was going, but she knew she couldn't stop. Not yet. The formula was still working through her, its effects growing stronger with every passing moment. She could feel it in her chest, a strange electric warmth that spread through her body like a wildfire. It was both exhilarating and terrifying, a rush of power that left her breathless. But it was also unpredictable. She didn't know how much longer she could hold on. A sudden flash of light caught her attention, and she glanced in the rearview mirror just in time to see one of the pursuing vehicles swerve dangerously close. The driver was trying to force her off the road, his movements aggressive and deliberate. She gritted her teeth, her hands tightening on the steering mechanism. She couldn't let them catch her. Not like this. With a sharp twist of the wheel, she veered to the right, the vehicle skidding as she narrowly avoided a collision. The pursuing vehicle fell back, but only for a moment. They were relentless, their determination unwavering. The road ahead began to narrow, the trees closing in on either side. She could see a faint glow in the distance, the lights of a small town or maybe a gas station. It was her only chance. If she could make it there, she might be able to lose them in the maze of streets and buildings. But it was still too far away, and the pursuing vehicles were closing in fast. She could hear the roar of their engines, the sound growing louder with every second. They were so close now, their headlights illuminating the interior of her vehicle, casting long, ominous shadows across her face. Her heart pounded in her chest, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. She could feel the weight of their presence, the inevitability of their pursuit. They weren't going to stop. Not until they had her. And if they caught her, she didn't want to think about what would happen next. The formula had changed her, and she didn't know how they would react if they found out the truth. She couldn't let that happen. She couldn't let them take her. With a sudden burst of determination, she slammed her foot down on the accelerator, the vehicle surging forward with a roar. The pursuing vehicles matched her speed, their engines growling like beasts. The road ahead was a blur, the trees and hills passing by in a rush of shadows. She could see the lights of the town growing closer, but it still felt impossibly far away. The tension in the air was palpable, the stakes higher than ever. She was so close, but so were they. And then, just as she thought she might make it, the road ahead disappeared. It happened so fast she barely had time to react. The road curved sharply to the left, but she was going too fast to make the turn. The vehicle skidded, the tires losing traction as it careened off the road and into the trees. The world spun in a chaotic blur of light and shadow, the sound of crunching metal and breaking glass filling the air. She felt the impact as the vehicle slammed into a tree, the force of the collision throwing her forward. The seatbelt dug into her chest, the air knocked from her lungs. For a moment, everything went silent. Then, slowly, the world came back into focus. She was alive, but barely. The vehicle was a mangled wreck, smoke rising from the engine. Her body ached, her head spinning as she tried to make sense of what had just happened. She could hear the sound of engines approaching, the headlights of the pursuing vehicles cutting through the darkness. They were here. And there was nowhere left to run. She fumbled with the seatbelt, her hands trembling as she tried to free herself. The door was jammed, the metal twisted and bent from the impact. She kicked at it, her movements frantic and uncoordinated. She had to get out. She had to keep moving. But it was too late. The pursuing vehicles skidded to a stop, their doors flying open as the drivers jumped out. She could see their silhouettes now, their faces grim and determined. They had her. Her heart sank as she realized the truth. There was no escape. Not this time. The formula had changed her, but it hadn't made her invincible. She was still just one person, alone and outnumbered. And now they were going to find out the truth. About her. About what she was. About what she had done. The man from the lab stepped forward, his expression unreadable. He didn't say anything, but his eyes told her everything she needed to know. This wasn't over. Not yet. And as he reached for her, his hand closing around her arm, she felt a surge of defiance. She wasn't going to give up. Not without a fight. The tension in the air was thick, the stakes higher than ever. She didn't know what would happen next, but she knew one thing for certain. The night was far from over. And whatever came next, it would change everything. The man's grip on her arm was firm, his fingers digging into her skin as he pulled her from the wreckage. She stumbled, her legs shaky and unsteady, but he didn't let go. His eyes were hard, his expression unreadable as he studied her. She could feel the weight of his gaze, the intensity of his focus. He was trying to figure her out, trying to piece together the puzzle of who she was and why she was here. But she wasn't sure she even knew the answers herself. The other men surrounded her, their weapons drawn, their faces grim. She could feel the tension in the air, the unspoken questions hanging heavy between them. They didn't know what to make of her, and that made them nervous. She could see it in their eyes, the flicker of uncertainty beneath their hardened exteriors. They were trained for combat, for confrontation, but this was something else entirely. And it scared them. "Who are you?" the man from the lab demanded, his voice low and steady. "And what were you doing in that base?" She opened her mouth to answer, but the words caught in her throat. How could she explain something she didn't even understand herself? The formula was still coursing through her veins, its effects growing stronger with every passing second. She could feel it in her chest, a strange electric warmth that spread through her body like a wildfire. It was both exhilarating and terrifying, a rush of power that left her breathless. But it was also unpredictable. She didn't know how much longer she could hold on. Before she could respond, a sudden noise cut through the night, sharp and piercing. It was a sound she had never heard before, but it sent a chill down her spine. The men around her tensed, their weapons snapping up as they scanned the darkness. The noise came again, louder this time, and she realized with a sinking feeling that it wasn't human. It was something else. Something other. The man from the lab turned to her, his expression darkening. "What did you do?" he asked, his voice tight with anger and fear. She shook her head, her mind racing. I didn't "I didn't mean to," she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. But even as she said it, she knew it wasn't enough. The formula had done something she couldn't explain. And now, whatever it was coming for them. The noise grew louder, closer, and she could feel the ground beneath her feet begin to tremble. The men around her exchanged uneasy glances, their grip on their weapons tightening. They were trained for combat, for confrontation, but this was something else entirely. And it scared them. "We need to move," one of the men said, his voice tense. "Now." The man from the lab hesitated, his eyes flicking between her and the darkness beyond. She could see the conflict in his expression, the struggle between duty and survival. Finally, he nodded, his grip on her arm tightening as he pulled her forward. "Move," he barked, his voice sharp with urgency. They moved quickly, their footsteps echoing in the night as they made their way back to the vehicles. She could feel the tension in the air, the unspoken fear that hung heavy between them. Whatever was coming, it was close. And it wasn't going to stop. As they reached the vehicles, the noise grew louder, more intense. It was a sound she couldn't describe, a mix of screeching metal and guttural growls that sent shivers down her spine. She could feel the ground beneath her feet shaking, the vibrations growing stronger with every passing second. Whatever it was big. And it was fast. The man from the lab shoved her into the back of one of the vehicles, his movements rough but efficient. "Stay down," he ordered, his voice sharp with authority. She didn't argue. She couldn't. Her body felt like it was on fire, her thoughts a chaotic storm of fear and adrenaline. The formula was still working through her, its effects growing stronger with every passing moment. She could feel it in her chest, a strange electric warmth that spread through her body like a wildfire. It was both exhilarating and terrifying, a rush of power that left her breathless. But it was also unpredictable. She didn't know how much longer she could hold on. The vehicles roared to life, their engines growling as they sped away from the scene. She could hear the noise behind them, the sound of whatever was chasing them growing louder with every second. It was close. Too close. And it wasn't going to stop. The man from the lab glanced back at her, his expression unreadable. "What did you do?" he asked again, his voice tight with anger and fear. She shook her head, her mind racing. "I didn't mean to," she whispered, her voice barely above a whisper. But even as she said it, she knew it wasn't enough. The formula had done something she couldn't explain. And now, whatever it was coming for them. The tension in the air was thick, the stakes higher than ever. She didn't know what would happen next, but she knew one thing for certain. The night was far from over. And whatever came next, it would change everything. The vehicles sped through the night, their headlights cutting through the darkness like knives. The noise behind them was deafening now, a cacophony of screeches and growls that seemed to shake the very air. She could feel the vibrations through the seat, her body trembling with a mix of fear and adrenaline. The man from the lab was in the driver's seat, his hands gripping the wheel so tightly his knuckles were white. His eyes kept flicking to the rearview mirror, his expression tense and unreadable. He didn't say a word, but she could feel the weight of his anger, his fear. He blamed her for this. And maybe he was right. She glanced out the window, her heart pounding in her chest. The landscape was a blur of shadows and shapes, the trees and hills merging into a dark, indistinct mass. She didn't know where they were going, but she knew they couldn't stop. Not with whatever was chasing them so close behind. The formula was still coursing through her veins, its effects growing stronger with every passing second. She could feel it in her chest, a strange electric warmth that spread through her body like a wildfire. It was both exhilarating and terrifying, a rush of power that left her breathless. But it was also unpredictable. She didn't know how much longer she could hold on. The noise behind them grew louder, more intense. She could feel the ground shaking, the vibrations growing stronger with every passing second. Whatever was chasing them, it was gaining ground. And it wasn't going to stop. "We're not going to make it," one of the men in the back seat said, his voice tight with fear. "We need to do something. Now." The man from the lab didn't respond, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. But she could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw tightened as he clenched his teeth. He was thinking, calculating, trying to come up with a plan. But there was no plan. Not for this. She closed her eyes, her mind racing. She had to do something. She couldn't just sit here and wait for whatever was chasing them to catch up. The formula had changed her, given her abilities she didn't fully understand. Maybe she could use them. Maybe she could stop whatever was coming. With a deep breath, she reached for the door handle, her fingers trembling as she gripped it tightly. The man from the lab noticed her movement, his eyes snapping to her in the rearview mirror. "What are you doing?" he demanded, his voice sharp with anger. She didn't answer. She couldn't. Instead, she yanked the door open, the cold night air rushing in as the vehicle sped down the road. The man shouted something, his voice lost in the wind, but she didn't stop. She couldn't. With a final burst of determination, she threw herself out of the vehicle, her body hitting the ground with a jarring thud. The world spun around her, her vision blurring as she rolled to a stop. She could feel the pain in her body, the ache in her bones, but she forced herself to stand. She had to do this. She had to stop whatever was coming. The noise was deafening now, the sound of whatever was chasing them growing louder with every second. She could feel the ground shaking beneath her feet, the vibrations growing stronger as it drew closer. And then, finally, she saw it. It was massive, its form a twisted, grotesque mix of metal and flesh. Its eyes glowed with a sickly yellow light, its mouth a gaping maw of jagged teeth. It moved with a terrifying speed, its limbs thrashing as it barreled toward her. She could feel the fear rising in her chest, the instinct to run screaming in her mind. But she didn't. She couldn't. She had to stop it. With a deep breath, she focused on the formula, on the power coursing through her veins. She could feel it, a strange electric warmth that spread through her body like a wildfire. It was both exhilarating and terrifying, a rush of power that left her breathless. But it was also unpredictable. She didn't know how much longer she could hold on. The creature was almost on her now, its eyes locked onto hers. She could feel the heat of its breath, the stench of decay and metal filling her nostrils. And then, with a final burst of determination, she reached out, her hand glowing with a soft, blue light. The creature stopped, its massive form freezing in place. She could feel the power surging through her, the formula working in ways she didn't fully understand. The creature's eyes flickered, its form shuddering as it struggled against her hold. But she didn't let go. She couldn't. And then, with a final, deafening roar, the creature exploded, its form disintegrating into a cloud of ash and smoke. The ground shook with the force of the explosion, the sound echoing through the night. And then, finally, there was silence. She stood there, her body trembling with exhaustion, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. She had done. She had stopped it. But at what cost? The man from the lab appeared beside her, his expression a mix of awe and fear. What are you?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. She didn't answer. She couldn't. Instead, she collapsed to the ground, her body finally giving out. The last thing she saw before everything went black was the man's face, his expression a mix of relief and something else. Something she couldn't quite name. When she woke up, she was in a small, dimly lit room. The walls were bare, the air thick with the scent of antiseptic. She could hear the faint hum of machines, the sound of footsteps outside the door. She didn't know where she was, but she knew one thing for certain. The night was far from over. And whatever came next, it would change everything. The door opened and the man from the lab stepped inside. His expression was unreadable, his eyes dark and intense. "You're awake," he said, his voice low and steady. She nodded, her mind racing. What happened?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The man hesitated, his eyes flicking to the door before he spoke. "You stopped it," he said finally. "But it's not over. Not yet." She felt a chill run down her spine, her heart pounding in her chest. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice tight with fear. The man didn't answer. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, unmarked vial. It glowed faintly, a soft blue light that seemed to pulse with energy. She recognized it immediately. It was the formula. The same formula that had started all of this. "We need to talk," he said, his voice low and steady. "Because whatever you are, you're not alone." And with those words, the tension in the air grew thicker, the stakes higher than ever. She didn't know what would happen next, but she knew one thing for certain. The night was far from over. And whatever came next, it would change everything. The room felt heavy, the air thick with unspoken questions and tension. She stared at the vial in the man's hand, its faint blue glow casting eerie shadows on the walls. Her mind raced, trying to piece together what he had just said. "You're not alone." What did that mean? Were there others like her? Others who had been changed by the formula? Or was it something else entirely? She didn't know, and the uncertainty made her chest tighten. The man stepped closer, his expression unreadable. He set the vial down on a small table beside her, the soft clink of glass against metal echoing in the silence. "You need to understand something," he said, his voice low but firm. "What happened to you, it wasn't an accident. Not entirely. Her breath caught in her throat. What are you talking about? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He hesitated, his eyes flicking to the door as if he expected someone to burst in at any moment. The formula, he began, it wasn't just some random experiment. It was designed for a specific purpose. To enhance human capabilities, yes, but also to bridge the gap between us and others. Her heart pounded as his words sank in. Others? She repeated, her voice trembling. You mean, like me? He nodded slowly, his gaze steady. You're not human. Not entirely. And neither are the others like you. The formula was meant to unlock something in you, something that was already there. But it was never supposed to happen like this. Not so violently. She felt a chill run down her spine. So what now? She asked, her voice tight with fear. What happens to me? To the others? The man sighed, running a hand through his hair. That's the problem, he said. We don't know. The formula was still in its experimental stages. We didn't anticipate this. He gestured to her, his eyes filled with a mix of awe and regret. You're stronger, faster, more resilient than anyone we've ever seen. But it's unstable. Unpredictable. And now, with what happened out there? He trailed off, his gaze distant. She thought back to the creature, the way it had disintegrated under her touch. The power she had felt coursing through her, the way it had consumed her. It had been terrifying but also exhilarating. And now she realized it was a part of her. A part she didn't fully understand. What about the others? She asked again, her voice firmer this time. You said I'm not alone. Where are they? What happened to them? The man hesitated, his expression darkening. They're out there, he said finally. Some of them are like you, changed but still in control. Others, not so much. The formula affects everyone differently. And some of them, they didn't handle it well. She felt a pang of guilt, though she wasn't sure why. She hadn't asked for this. She hadn't wanted any of it. But now she was a part of it. And she couldn't just walk away. What do you want from me? She asked, her voice steady despite the fear bubbling beneath the surface. The man looked at her, his eyes searching hers. We need your help, he said simply. You're the only one who's been able to control it. The only one who's been able to stop them. If we're going to fix this, if we're going to stop whatever's coming, we need you. She felt a surge of emotions, fear, anger, confusion. But beneath it all there was something else. A sense of purpose. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing for certain. She couldn't run from this. Not anymore. Okay, she said finally, her voice firm. I'll help. But on one condition. The man raised an eyebrow. What's that? You tell me everything, she said, her eyes locking onto his. No more secrets. No more lies. If I'm going to do this, I need to know what I'm up against. He hesitated, then nodded. Deal. Over the next few hours he told her everything. About the formula, about the experiments, about the others like her. He told her about the creatures, the ones that had been twisted by the formula, turned into something monstrous. And he told her about the plan, or what was left of it. They needed to find the others, the ones who were still in control. They needed to stop the ones who weren't. And they needed to do it fast. By the time he finished, the sun was beginning to rise, its faint light filtering through the small window. She felt exhausted, her mind reeling from everything she had learned. But she also felt determined. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about all of them. And she couldn't let them down. The man stood, his expression grim but resolute. We don't have much time, he said. Are you ready? She took a deep breath, then nodded. I'm ready. The days that followed were a blur of action and tension. They traveled from place to place, tracking down the others like her. Some were willing to help, their eyes filled with the same determination she felt. Others were hesitant, their fear and anger making them hard to reach. And then there were the ones who had lost control, their bodies twisted and broken by the formula. Those were the hardest to face. But through it all she kept going. She used the power the formula had given her, not to destroy but to protect. To save. And slowly, piece by piece, they began to make progress. They found more of the others, built a team, a fragile alliance bound by a shared purpose. And together they began to fight back. It wasn't easy. There were losses, setbacks, moments when it felt like everything was falling apart. But she kept going. They all did. Because they had to. Because there was no other choice. And then, finally, it was over. The last of the twisted creatures was gone, the formula's effects contained. The others like her were safe, their lives no longer defined by fear and uncertainty. And she was finally free. But as she stood there, Looking out at the world she had helped save, she couldn't help but feel a pang of sadness. The formula had changed her in ways she was still trying to understand. It had given her power, but it had also taken something from her. Something she couldn't quite name. The man from the lab approached her, his expression softer now. "You did it," he said, his voice filled with a quiet awe. "You saved us." She shook her head, a small smile tugging at her lips. "We saved us," she corrected. "All of us." He nodded, his eyes filled with gratitude. "What will you do now?" he asked. She thought for a moment, then shrugged. "I don't know," she admitted. "But I think I'll figure it out." And with that, she turned and walked away, her steps steady and sure. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time she felt hopeful. She had faced the unknown and she had come out stronger. And whatever came next, she knew she could handle it. The world was still full of mysteries, full of dangers. But it was also full of possibilities. And she was ready to explore them. All of them. As the sun rose behind her, casting its warm light over the world, she took a deep breath and smiled. The night was over. And a new day was beginning.